It's May 2nd, 1729, and in the Prussian city of Stettin, a future empress is born. This is Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, the woman who would become Catherine the Great. Sophie's father, Christian August, was a prince of Anhalt-Zerbst, a small German state. Though not particularly wealthy or powerful, Christian August had carved out a respected career as a military man in the service of the King of Prussia, Frederick William I, eventually rising to the rank of General. Her mother, Joanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp, had even stronger royal connections. Joanna was related to the Swedish royal family. Her brother, Adolf Frederick, would later become King of Sweden. This lineage, though seemingly distant from the Russian throne, would ultimately play a crucial role in Sophie's destiny. Growing up in Sophie received a typical education for a girl of her station: French language instruction, music lessons, and a smattering of history and geography. She was a bright and inquisitive child, known for her intelligence and eagerness to learn. Some accounts even describe her as a bit of a tomboy, a characteristic that foreshadowed her independent spirit. However, Sophie's childhood wasn't exactly overflowing with luxury. Her family, though noble, was relatively poor, and they understood the importance of a good marriage for their daughter. In the 18th century, royal marriages were rarely about love, but about dynastic stability and strategic alliances. And so, from a young age, Sophie was primed to be a valuable pawn in the game of European power politics. The crucial turning point came in 1744. Empress Elizabeth of Russia, daughter of Peter the Great, needed to secure the succession to the Russian throne. Elizabeth herself had no children, and her chosen heir was her nephew, Karl Peter Ulrich of Holstein-Gottorp. Karl Peter was the grandson of Peter the Great through his eldest daughter, Anna Petrovna, and had been brought to Russia to be raised. As the future Tsar, he was named Grand Duke Peter Fedorovich. The problem Peter was, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly impressive. He was sickly, immature, and seemingly uninterested in Russia or its people. Empress Elizabeth needed to find Peter a wife, and quickly. She wanted a bride who could produce an heir, legitimize Peter's claim, and, ideally, bring some much-needed intelligence and ambition to the Russian court. And this is where Sophie enters center stage. Empress Elizabeth, always keeping a close eye on European affairs, considered Sophie and her family. Several factors made Sophie an attractive candidate. First, her mother, Joanna Elizabeth, was related to the Swedish royal family and also held ties to powerful Prussian figures, making her a politically advantageous choice. Second, Sophie was young, intelligent, and, by all accounts, possessed a strong will. Thus, in 1744, Empress Elizabeth extended an invitation to Sophie and her mother to visit Russia. For Sophie, a young woman from a relatively obscure German principality, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. She seized it with both hands. The journey to Russia was arduous, but upon arriving in Moscow, Sophie immediately set about winning over Empress Elizabeth and the Russian court. She dedicated herself to learning the Russian language, immersed herself in Russian culture, and, most importantly, converted to the Russian Orthodox faith. This conversion was a pivotal moment. Sophie renounced her Lutheran faith and was baptized into the Orthodox Church, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. This shrewd move demonstrated her commitment to Russia and its people, endearing her to Empress Elizabeth and solidifying her position as the most likely candidate to marry the Grand Duke Peter. And marry him she did. on August 21st, 1745, at the age of 16. Catherine married the 17-year-old Peter in a lavish ceremony in St. Petersburg. The future seemed bright, but the reality of her new life was far from a fairy tale. From the very beginning, the marriage was a disaster. Peter and Catherine were utterly incompatible. He was immature, boorish, and completely uninterested in his wife. He preferred playing with toy soldiers and engaging in childish pranks to spending time with Catherine. It's said he openly confided in her about his affairs with other women, even bragging about them. Catherine, meanwhile, was intelligent, ambitious, and increasingly isolated. She found herself trapped in a loveless marriage with a man she despised. In a foreign land, surrounded by intrigue and suspicion, Peter made no secret of his contempt for Russia, its customs, and its people. His admiration for Frederick the Great of Prussia was unwavering, and he openly criticized the Russian military and government. The couple lived largely separate lives within the Russian court. Peter spent his time indulging in childish pursuits, while Catherine immersed herself in books, studied Russian politics, and cultivated relationships with influential figures. She realized that her future depended on her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Russian court and to secure her own power base. The early years of Catherine's marriage were marked by loneliness and frustration. She was essentially a prisoner of her circumstances, forced to endure the humiliation of her husband's indifference and the uncertainty of her future. But Catherine was not one to be easily defeated. She used this time to learn, to observe, and to strategize. She realized that Peter was not fit to rule, and that Russia deserved a better leader. And slowly but surely, the seeds of rebellion began to sprout in Catherine's ambitious mind. This unhappy beginning would set the stage for one of the most dramatic power grabs in history. All right, buckle up, because this is where things get really interesting. It's June 1762. Peter III, barely 6 months into his reign, is already facing a storm of discontent. See, Peter wasn't exactly endearing himself to the Russian elite. His open admiration for Prussia, Russia's former enemy in the 7 Years' War, was a major sticking point. Suddenly switching sides after all the Russian blood and treasure spilled. Not a great look, Peter. Beyond that, he was pushing through reforms, some sensible, some downright bizarre, that ruffled feathers at every turn. He talked a big game about religious tolerance, which wasn't sitting well with the Orthodox Church. He was meddling with the military, changing uniforms and training methods based on Prussian models. Remember, these are the guys Russia just fought. It was like inviting the wolf to redesign the sheep pen. The dude was a walking, talking PR disaster. And then there's Catherine. While Peter was busy alienating everyone, his wife, Catherine, was doing the opposite. She'd meticulously cultivated relationships with key figures in the military, the nobility, and even the church. Remember how she embraced Russian culture and learned the language? That was paying off big time. People saw her as intelligent, capable, and, crucially, Russian at heart. A stark contrast to her husband's perceived foreign leanings. The plot was brewing beneath the surface. Key players included the Orlov brothers, Alexei Gregory and Fyodor, all officers in the Imperial Guard, and all incredibly loyal to Catherine. Gregory Orlov, in particular, was Catherine's lover and a powerful figure in his own right. Then there was Princess Ekaterina Dashkova, a close friend of Catherine and a highly influential noblewoman. These were the core members of the conspiracy, and they were working to sway others to their side. Things came to a head when Peter decided to take a trip to Oranienbaum. his favorite residence outside St. Petersburg, he brought his Prussian cronies with him, leaving Catherine behind in the capital. This was the opportunity the conspirators had been waiting for. On July 9, 1762, Catherine, with the support of the Orlov brothers, made her move. She donned a guard's uniform, a bold symbolic gesture, and rode to the Izmailovsky regiment. Barracks, the soldiers, already primed by the conspirators, cheered her arrival. The Orthodox clergy were there too, ready to lend their spiritual authority to the coup. One by one, regiments of the Imperial Guard swore allegiance to Catherine, proclaiming her the rightful Empress of Russia. It was a whirlwind. Catherine, now surrounded by loyal troops, marched to the Winter Palace, encountering little resistance. The city of St. Petersburg was hers. A manifesto was drawn up, outlining the reasons for Peter's deposition, his incompetence, his pro-Prussian policies, his threat to the Orthodox Church. It was a masterpiece of propaganda, designed to legitimize Catherine's seizure of power. Meanwhile, Peter was blissfully unaware in Oranienbaum. When news of the coup finally reached him, he was stunned. Initially, he considered fighting back. He had troops loyal to him, after all. But his advisors urged caution. They argued that resistance would lead to bloodshed and civil war. Peter, never known for his decisiveness, wavered. Ultimately, he made the fateful decision to abdicate. Faced with overwhelming opposition and fearing for his life, he signed the abdication papers on July 10th. It was a complete and utter defeat. Peter, the Emperor of Russia just days before, was now a prisoner. He was taken into custody and held at Ropsha, a remote estate about 30 miles from St. Petersburg. And this is where the story takes a dark, controversial turn. Just a week later, on July 17th, Peter III was dead. The official cause of death: colic, complicated by excessive drinking. Yeah, right, the circumstances surrounding Peter's death are shrouded in mystery and intrigue. The accepted version of events is that he got into a drunken argument with Alexei Orlov and other guards. The argument escalated into a brawl, and Peter was strangled. But here's where the debate begins. Did Catherine order Peter's murder? There's no direct evidence linking her to the crime. No signed order, no smoking gun. But the fact remains: Peter's death conveniently eliminated a potential rival to the throne. Catherine benefited enormously from his demise. Some historians argue that Alexei Orlov acted on his own initiative, perhaps hoping to curry favor with the new Empress. Or maybe it was a simple case of drunken violence spiraling out of control. Others believe that Catherine, while not explicitly ordering the murder, subtly signaled her approval, leaving the dirty work to her loyal followers. After all, she knew Peter was a threat to her power, and she was a pragmatist. The truth may never be fully known, but the fact that Peter's death occurred so soon after his abdication, and under such suspicious circumstances, has forever cast a shadow over Catherine's reign. Was she a brilliant and enlightened ruler, or a ruthless Machiavellian willing to do anything to secure her power? The debate continues to this day. One thing is for certain: Catherine III was a powerful woman in every sense of the word. Catherine, having secured her grip on the throne, wasted no time in solidifying her legacy. Her reign, which stretched from 1762 to 1796, became synonymous with Russia's rise as a major European power, a feat accomplished through a shrewd combination of enlightened ideals and ruthless pragmatism. We talk a lot about enlightened absolutism, but what did that actually mean for Catherine? Well, on paper, It meant embracing reforms inspired by the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot became her pen pals, their philosophical ideas influencing her policies on law, education, and even economics. She flirted with the idea of a new legal code, a vast undertaking that ultimately sputtered out. But it showcased her intellectual engagement with the progressive ideas of the time. Catherine certainly wasn't afraid to shake things up. She championed education, establishing schools for girls and boys. Although, let's be honest, the focus was largely on the nobility and the emerging middle class. She flirted with economic reforms, encouraging foreign investment and trade, which boosted the Russian economy. But, and it's a big but, let's not get carried away with the enlightened part. Catherine was still an absolutist. She held all the cards, and she played them with an iron fist. The well-being of her subjects was always secondary to the power and prestige of the Russian Empire. And that meant expansion. Catherine's foreign policy was aggressively expansionist. She had her eyes set on new territories, specifically to the south and west. Through a series of wars with the Ottoman Empire, she secured access to the Black Sea, a vital trade route and a major strategic victory. The Crimean Peninsula, a strategically important region, became part of Russia. The partitions of Poland, a series of calculated land grabs alongside Prussia and Austria, expanded Russia's territory at the expense of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. These actions, while adding vast swathes of land to the Russian Empire, also revealed the less palatable side of Catherine's ambition. Was she an enlightened reformer or a ruthless imperialist? The answer, perhaps unsurprisingly, is a bit of both. Now, let's talk about the juicy stuff. Catherine's personal life was, shall we say, unconventional for the time. After the rather unceremonious departure of her husband, Peter III, Catherine chose not to remarry. Instead, she took a string of lovers. And when we say string, we mean it. She had well over a dozen official favorites during her reign. These weren't just fleeting affairs either. Catherine often elevated her lovers to positions of power and influence. Gregory Potemkin, perhaps the most famous of these, was a military leader, statesman, and arguably her most important advisor. He was instrumental in the annexation of Crimea and the development of southern Russia. He wasn't just arm candy, he was a key player in her administration. These relationships, of course, fueled endless gossip and speculation. Catherine was often criticized for her perceived promiscuity, but she seemed largely unbothered by the rumors. She controlled the narrative, projecting an image of a strong, independent woman who defied traditional expectations. And let's be honest, it probably helped that many of her lovers were also highly competent individuals who contributed to the empire's success. It certainly made the court murmurs a little less pointed, which leads us to her death. Catherine's reign came to an abrupt end on November 17, 1796. The official cause, a stroke. She was found unconscious on the floor of her chambers, and despite the efforts of her physicians, she died the following day at the age of 67. But as with any powerful historical figure, especially one with a colorful personal life, rumors swirled around her death. And these weren't your run-of-the-mill rumors. Some claimed she died in the most unusual of circumstances, involving a horse. Yeah, you heard that right. The story goes that she was crushed to death by a horse when a contraption she was using for, well, let's just say, personal entertainment malfunctioned. Another, equally outlandish theory suggested she was assassinated via a spring-loaded blade concealed in her toilet seat. Yes, folks, you heard that right, a toilet assassination. Historians, however, dismiss these theories as pure fantasy. The autopsy confirmed a cerebral hemorrhage, and there's no credible evidence to support these more sensational accounts. But the fact that these stories circulated at all speaks to the fascination, and sometimes the disdain, that Catherine inspired. The more outrageous the claim, the more traction it seemed to gain. Regardless of the rumors, Catherine's death marked a turning point in Russian history. Her son, Paul I, ascended to the throne. Paul, who had a notoriously strained relationship with his mother, reversed many of her policies, much to the dismay of the nobility. The enlightened ideals of Catherine's reign were replaced by a more autocratic and rigid approach. Catherine was laid to rest in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, dressed in a silver brocade dress and adorned with a golden crown. Her legacy, however, remained complex and contested. She was a powerful, an effective ruler who expanded Russia's territory and modernized its institutions. But she was also an autocrat who relied on serfdom, engaged in ruthless power politics, and whose personal life was often scandalous. So, how should we remember Catherine the Great? As an enlightened reformer or a calculating imperialist? A visionary leader or a power-hungry ruler? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. She was a complex figure who embodied the contradictions of her time. She was both a product of the Enlightenment and a practitioner of absolute power. Her reign was a period of significant progress for Russia, but it also laid the groundwork for future social and political unrest. Catherine the Great remains a fascinating and controversial figure, a testament to the enduring power of ambition, intellect, and a healthy dose of ruthlessness. A figure who left a permanent mark on the map and the mindset of Russia.